Michael, thank you very much for taking time today to speak with me. Yeah, let's start with maybe tell us about you. We would like to get to know you.
Okay, well, I'll keep it kind of relevant to the project we're talking about, I guess, because I guess there's a lot a person can say about themselves when they're getting towards 40 years old. So back in the UK, my family has a company selling art materials. This was started about 20 years ago or more. Back in the days when, it was all mail order, so you would have catalogs and you would fill in a little form. And just around the time, kind of in the like mid 90s, we got a modem at the office and got Netscape Composer and started playing about with all, making web pages and stuff like that. And so I had the idea, well, we should make a website. So this is how I kind of got into web development and specifically e-commerce stuff. And, we went through a few iterations making websites and it was just a brochure way, at the time, HTML tables and little images you take on a 2-megapixel digital camera and this kind of thing. And then anyway, eventually I got more into programming and learned PHP and databases and stuff and started building some custom things like that. So anyway, so that's something I've been doing for, over 15 years now. And then I more recently had a job working on a headless CMS for an Austrian company. And that kind of got me into this whole headless architecture thing. The open source projects I've been running for, I don't know, maybe the last like 8 years or so. And yeah, and in the last 4 years, I kind of brought all these threads together and I started this project Venture, which is open source. It's a headless commerce framework. So yeah, I managed to kind of tie everything into one thing that I get to do every day now.
That's great. Maybe to start with the headless, why did you choose headless when there is a developer first mindset for the headless, or there are things about no code, low code solution? What was the reason for Venture to choose the developer first headless approach?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, the headless, the fundamental kind of freedom it gives you as a developer is that then you can use any technology on the front end, any kind of client side technology that you want, and even things like point of sale devices or IoT devices, things like that. So it gives you that freedom and it gives you the ability to also not be anchored to the tech choices that the backend had to make at the time that it was created. So backend systems tend to be very long-lived compared to front-end systems. So even the average kind of e-commerce application might run for many years, 5, 10 years or more. Like ours has been going for like over 15 years now. 15 years ago, you can choose the state-of-the-art technologies to run on the front end and guarantee the developers are not going to be happy with that 5, 10 or 15 years down the line. So headless frees you from this fundamental constraint and it allows the front end to evolve independently of the back end.
That sounds great. Makes sense. In terms of a trend, are you seeing any general trend across headless building modern applications? Are you seeing towards building headless or a Jamstack approach? What do you like to say about the latest trend of building modern applications? When I'm talking about modern application, I'm talking about a customer who is an enterprise. If somebody wants to build a large scale applications, why somebody should kind of consider, and what is the trend for headless?
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. I mean, first of all, I would say that headless makes the most sense for large scale applications and larger organizations, because one of the trade-offs with headless that needs to be well understood is that there are more upfront costs to do with building, because you don't get a front end out of the box like you do with systems that aren't headless. So that's the first thing. So, but for those organizations who have the scale and the requirement to kind of piece together a kind of custom parts to satisfy all their various business requirements, then headless makes a lot of sense, because you can take headless commerce part that handles the orders and the inventory management, perhaps a completely different system that's focused on content management. There's lots of headless CMSs out there, and various other parts, search, product information management, and so on. So for a large project, it gives you this ability to compose the whole application out of these parts, each of which is like very, very good at handling the concern that it's designed for.
That's great. So, in a nutshell, you're trying to say instead of taking a one fixed solution, you can choose a best of breed, and for a specific expertise of that particular domain, for e-commerce, for a CMS, for a search, the developers or a tech companies have a wider choice to make, and they can choose the best technology, what fits to their needs.
Yeah, that's right. Because, there's always this tendency for any system as it becomes more popular and more well used and feature requests come in, it kind of expands its scope. And you see this happen a lot with the kind of incumbent solutions where they spread out and become this whole platform that tries to do everything. And I think that's very difficult to do well, because let's take just CMS, for example. It's such a complex problem to solve, just CMS. There's so many things to think about and get right that to the idea of just bolting that onto like a commerce solution, I think you're going to end up with a substandard CMS solution, whereas there's already companies who just do CMS and they are able to do it really well because they know it and they specialize in it. And the same goes for any kind of part of the solution that you're trying to build.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. What's your opinion? Like these best of breed choices are there for developers. Will it increase a complexity of the modern application in terms of developers have to handle many microservices? And what do you like to say about on that?
Yes, of course it increases the complexity. It's a trade-off. There's no silver bullets, as we all know. So you've got to evaluate the trade-off, for your particular requirements. How sophisticated do you need a CMS to be? For example, in Venture, you can actually build a CMS as a plugin. And if you don't need like versioning and publishing dates, automation and stuff like that, it's pretty simple to build a plugin that just does basic CMS stuff. And for some people, that should be fine. But for others, if they've got like multiple editors, they've got different languages, they've got a publishing and approval workflow, you'll probably want a standalone CMS. But of course, it increases the complexity. You have, on the engineering side, you've got 2 APIs now instead of 1, and you've got to somehow figure out, am I going to proxy this on the server side? Am I going to bring them all together on the client side? There's all these new decisions that have to be made. And also, from the business side now, you've got 2 vendors instead of 1, potentially just more to deal with. So that is, a trade-off that needs to be understood.
Yeah, that's true. And in terms of developer experience, are you taking care of any things which can be improve the developer experience, like orchestrating different API endpoints or facilitating better integration of different systems? Are there any trends you're seeing regarding how to manage multiple systems to make the developer life easy?
Well, I mean, it's not specifically something that Venture is the project itself doesn't concern itself too much with this orchestration idea. It's more, that's something that would live like at the next layer of the stack. And what can I say about that? I mean, there's, there's lots of tooling and there's new things coming out all the time, and there's Kubernetes. And one thing I like is that there's this new breed of hosting solutions, like the kind of the new Heroku's kind of springing up, and they're trying to make that kind of ability to manage multiple systems a bit easier. And I've tried things like Render, North Railways, another one. So that's one thing that I think is a positive trend. But I think there's even further that they can push it, like in terms of making DevOps less unpleasant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you see any best developer experience in your toolings, like which you have used recently? Like they are doing really good job in terms of tooling for developers. Do you have any examples you would like to share?
Yeah, so I can start off with more like at the lower level of the actual tools that I'd like to build with. So, Vendra is built with TypeScript, which is a piece of tooling that I absolutely love. I've been using it for since version 0.9 or something a long time ago. This totally changes the way you can develop with JavaScript and Node and on the front end as well. GraphQL is another thing, and that complements TypeScript really nicely, because then you can use your GraphQL schemas to generate your TypeScript types. And then when your schema changes, your storefront client-side app knows about it, and it will warn you at build time. So this is like a new kind of thing over the last few years I've been working a lot with, and it's really, really an excellent developer experience. What else? I got really into Tailwind recently. I was a skeptic. I think like everyone starts off like they see the market thing, no. But I've been building, all my recent projects have been built with it, and it just works. There's, no matter what you kind of think, what your heart says about it, when you see it, it just works. So those are the kind of like low-level building block tools that I've been enjoying recently.
That's cool. Any specific part of Tailwind CSS do you like? Is it the namings, or is it making you easy not to remember really hard CSS things where you can kind of more customization? Is there anything which you specifically like about Tailwind CSS?
Yeah, there's two things I like. Number one is the constraints it gives you. So it gives you a design system. You don't have to think about how many, was I doing multiples of 4 pixels or multiples of 6 pixels? I can't remember. And then you just end up with something random. All those kind of things. It takes away, I like tools that take away these kind of decisions that are really low value decisions that you end up having to make when you don't have some system that handles this in an orderly fashion. It's similar to why I like a lot of aspects I like about TypeScript. It takes away a lot of decisions. You press dot, you see the methods or the properties available, and you choose the one. So yeah, I like the constraints of Tailwind, and I like the workflow. I like just staying in one file and adding a class, see the update in the browser, not having to jump into the CSS, not having to think of class names. That's probably one of the biggest wins. Thinking of adding like wrapper at the end of things and having multiple wrappers and all this kind of stuff. That's just out of the window, which is nice.
I totally agree. Those are really great observations. Yes, and in the end, you are trying to reduce the effort and time to think through different things and making it life easy for developers to have a efficient workflow. Yeah, that's great. And do you have any kind of recent experience or a success story you would like to share? Like, hey, it can be venture or some use case you would like to talk. Like, hey, it was a really great story you would like to share.
With developer experience?
Yes.
Okay, let me think. You didn't prepare me for this one. Yeah. Okay, so I'll give you an example. So I dog food venture heavily, right? Because I wrote it to scratch my own itch. I needed a framework to build an e-commerce website, so I made Venture, and so I'm using it like split my time between working on the framework itself and actually using it as a user. So yeah, I've had a bunch of wins recently by actually just using Venture and kind of realizing that the APIs that have been put in place there make complex things quite easy to do, and I think it's got quite a nice balance of being kind of powerful enough to let you do pretty much anything you want, but not allowing you to get lost in the weeds. You can take the typical example of like Webpack config, where it's like super powerful and you can do everything, but people kind of tend to dislike it because it's not giving you enough guidance and you get lost and you don't know what to do. So with the Venture APIs, using it as a user, I found that, yeah, for me anyway, it's at this really nice point of I can use the power of it and I don't get stuck down in the very, very low level configurations and having to wire too many things up. But of course, I would say that because I design it for myself. So I design it to my own tastes.
Oh, that's cool. And you're saying it's more like the dog fooding style, where you build something and assuming the target users are somewhere there. So you are using it on your own purpose and you're building it heavily. So you see that how powerful, how easy to use this, and you can really sense it from a consumer point of view as well.
Yeah, I think that comes through, because you sometimes use products and you think like, who designed this API? They've obviously never used it, right? And that's a danger when you're just building something for other people to use. And that it goes for everything. It's just a user experience point. But if you're also the user at the same time of the thing that you're building, then it really closes this feedback loop. And when you make a bad decision, then you feel it like the next day when you try and use your API, you think, nah, this just doesn't make sense. Then you can change it. So like I think this idea of tight feedback loops is actually a central theme of all developer experience, and it applies here as well.
Agree. Do you also do any pair design or pair programming session with your customers or with your consumers of Avenger? Do you also get some feedback?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm not specifically done pair programming so far, although that would be pretty cool. But yeah, definitely there's lots of contributions, and there's several like major architectural contributions that massively improve framework coming from community. Because one interesting thing about Avenger is that many people started actually using it in production before I ever did. So I was building it and building it and building it. And then, after a while, after a year or so, there's suddenly people popped up and said, oh, I'm using it in production, by the way. And I ran into this problem because, when you're at scale, you run into X, Y, Z. Of course, running localhost on my little data set, I didn't know about these issues. So when a real user comes and can point that out, and, in some cases, even like put in PR and solve it, then, that's huge. That's one of the reasons why I do this open source.
That's great. That's great. You're having enough feedback from the community.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael, do you get any kind of see any trends in the modern front-end development, or it can be in a Jamstack or a Headless? Are you seeing any trends which you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think so. There's two things I think are really interesting at the moment. Number one, Jamstack in its kind of original form, I think, is losing prominence. So pure static sites, they make sense for they make sense for a certain class of problem like blogs and static sites. It's in the name. If it's static, it can make a lot of sense. I do a lot of my stuff with Hugo, static site generator, and it's great. It's very fast, and I'm happy with it. But this is for like documentation. But for things like e-commerce, maybe blogs, I think over time people started to sense that, hey, this it's not quite fitting very well. If I change the product description, I have to rebuild my website with 5,000 products. And then, of course, there's been kind of solutions to this with incremental regeneration and so on. But to me, it seems like workarounds on top of a fundamental wrong assumption for that use case. So what's really interesting for me is this shift towards or back to server generated stuff, but with a twist of, hey, what if we do this on edge computing platforms? Something like Remix, for example, which I played with recently and did a demo shop. This is cool because you get rid of all these issues, these problems that go with like trying to generate something ahead of time, build time. You still get the speed, you still get the kind of the SEO benefits and all this kind of stuff, but it just works really fast. So yeah, those two things are interesting. Oh, one other thing that I want to mention is I think we're coming into a time of renewed innovation in front-end frameworks. There's things like Remix is one example, which basically they do think projects which are doing something fundamentally different from the paradigm that was really established by React of component-based, everything client-side, Angular kind of went to follow the model Vue and so on. They have their differences, but fundamentally the model is the same. Remix then introduces some like actual interesting differences. Solid.js is another that I've heard lots about, not tried yet. Another one I'd like to mention is Quick from Build.io. I was able to get a demo at the recent We Are Developers conference from the author, Mishko. And that seems something like that could really change the way we approach how we build client-side applications, how we deal with JavaScript coming to the browser.
Sounds great. Sounds really interesting. I should check it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you stay up to date with this industry latest news or blogs or podcast or anything you would like to share with us?
Yeah, like mainly Twitter. I'm on Twitter a lot. So yeah, just following what people are talking about. I mean, there's Twitter development, and then there's just like actual development that happens in the real world. And there's like in a Venn diagram, there's some overlap, but I find Twitter's good for like looking at what could be coming as an interesting trend to follow. It's very hype driven, which, as long as you're aware of that, then it's a useful tool to follow what's going on. For like headless stuff and headless commerce, there is a good newsletter called the XP Report, which I recommend if you're into that whole area. Yeah, I don't really listen to dev podcasts so much. That's about it.
Okay, that's great. And where can people find you? Like if somebody wants to reach out to you or to hear more things about you or venture.
Yeah, so they can follow me on Twitter or DM me or whatever on Twitter. It's at MICHLBRMLY. They can visit my website, michaelbromley.co.uk, where there's writing not so much about hardcore dev stuff, but all sorts of things. Email me, whatever. Join the Venture Slack. I'm on there most of the time.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Thank you very much for taking time today. And I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you, Michael.